As the sun dips below the horizon and the stars begin to twinkle, let's embark on a journey through time and myth. Close your eyes and imagine a world where gods walked among mortals, where legends were born, and where two brothers would shape the destiny of an empire. Tonight, we delve into the heart of ancient Rome, a civilization that has captivated imaginations for millennia. Rome, with its grand colosseums, sprawling aqueducts, and powerful legions, stands as one of the most legendary civilizations in human history. But every great empire has its origin story, and Rome-s begins with a tale as old as time itself. The story of Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a she-wolf. You've likely heard of Romulus, the famed founder of Rome, but what about his brother Remus? Often overshadowed and forgotten, Remus played a crucial role in the birth of this mighty empire. Tonight, we'll unravel the mystery of this lesser-known twin and discover how his fate became intertwined with the very foundations of Rome. In the world of ancient Rome, myths weren't just bedtime stories. They were the fabric of society, shaping identities, values, and beliefs. The tale of Romulus and Remus was more than just a legend. It was a reflection of Roman ideals, a blueprint for their culture, and a justification for their ambitions. As we embark on this mythical journey, we'll trace Remus' life from his miraculous birth to his tragic end. We'll explore the trials he faced alongside his brother, the growing rivalry that tore them apart, and the fateful moment that would seal his place in history. But Remus' story doesn't end with his death. His legacy lives on, echoing through the centuries and influencing Rome long after his passing. So settle in and prepare to be transported to a world of gods and mortals, where the line between myth and reality blurs. We'll walk the ancient streets of Rome, feel the weight of destiny on our shoulders, and see the eternal city through the eyes of Remus, the forgotten twin who played a pivotal role in shaping one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. Our tale begins on the banks of the Tiber River, where a wicker basket carrying two infant boys drifts gently in the current. These are no ordinary children. They are Romulus and Remus, born of a Vestal virgin and the god Mars himself. Abandoned and left to the mercy of the elements, their fate seems sealed. But the gods have other plans. As the basket comes to rest on the muddy shore, a she-wolf emerges from the nearby forest. Her eyes, fierce yet tender, fall upon the helpless infants, in a moment that would be immortalized in Roman art and literature for centuries to come. She takes the twins under her protection, nursing them as if they were her own cubs. This extraordinary beginning sets the stage for a life filled with adventure, conflict, and ultimately, tragedy. As Romulus and Remus grow from wolf-raised infants to strong young men, they discover their true heritage and set out to reclaim their birthright. But the path to greatness is never smooth, and the brothers soon find themselves at odds with each other. It's here, in the rivalry between Romulus and Remus, that we see the seeds of Rome's future conflicts. Their disagreement over where to found their new city becomes a metaphor for the internal struggles that would shape Roman politics for centuries to come. Remus, often portrayed as the more impulsive and headstrong of the two, challenges his brother's authority, a decision that will have far-reaching consequences. As we delve deeper into Remus's story, we'll explore the complex relationship between the twins, examining how their bond of brotherhood became strained by ambition and the weight of destiny. We'll see how Remus, despite being overshadowed by his more famous brother, played a crucial role in the founding of Rome, even if that role was ultimately a tragic one. But Remus' influence didn't end with his death. His story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the price of discord and the importance of unity. In many ways, Remus became a symbol of the sacrifices necessary to build a great civilization, a theme that would resonate throughout Roman history. As we continue our journey through this ancient myth, we'll uncover the layers of meaning hidden within the tale of Romulus and Remus. We'll see how this story, passed down through generations, shaped Roman identity and values, from the importance of fraternal bonds to the justification of imperial expansion. The myth of the twin founders touched every aspect of Roman life. So, as the night deepens and the world grows quiet, let the story of Remus, the forgotten twin, the tragic hero, the eternal symbol of Rome's complex legacy, wash over you. For in understanding Remus, we come to understand Rome itself, in all its glory and all its contradictions.
Chapter 2: The World Before the Twins. Background of Rome's myth. The year is 800 BCE and we are in Italy. Well, not that Italy, obviously, but Italy. There's no Rome here yet. There's this other place called Alba Longa though, which may or may not have been a real historical city. It doesn't really matter for our purposes, because it's going to be absorbed into Rome later anyway, but it is ruled by a king named Numeta, and Numeta has this brother, Romulus, who wants to be king instead of him. So he murders Numeta, takes the throne, murders Numeta's son, and makes Numeta's daughter, Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin to ensure that no heirs will ever take the throne from him. If you can keep track of all those names, you are doing better than I am, because there are so many people with similar names who all kind of blend together for me. But let's get this straight. We've got Numeta, the good king, and Romulus, the bad king, right? And then they each have kids. Numeta has a son and a daughter, and Romulus has at least one son, maybe more, whom he makes a collaborator in his crimes, forcing the boy to watch while he strangles his own cousin. And that kid grows up to be the next king after Romulus. Anyway, we're keeping track. Got it. Alright, moving on. So Rhea Silvia is made a Vestal virgin, a priestess dedicated to the goddess Vesta, whose sacred duty is to keep the sacred fire burning, in exchange for taking her away from her family and forcing her into an isolated life of servitude. She is promised protection, a high status, and most importantly, marriage. And as soon as she's old enough, Romulus marries her off to his son, who promptly kills her too, just for fun, I guess. Just kidding. She isn't killed, but she does get pregnant, and that's a problem. Not only is she supposed to be a virgin, if she's pregnant, she's either been unfaithful or violated some other law of the sacred duty, which means she must be punished. Also, and this is probably the bigger problem, she would bear a legitimate heir to her father's throne. Now, I know what you're thinking. This story sounds familiar. Where did they get that idea? Well, they didn't get it from Greek mythology. That story came much later. This is actually the first appearance of this particular myth, and it appears twice. Once in the early Latin poem The Carmen, which I told you about in the last video, and once in Livy's History of Rome. For our purposes, we can use them interchangeably, except that Livy adds a little detail that we need to talk about. While planning his dastardly deeds, Romulus goes to consult the oracle of Delphi, and the god Apollo tells him to sacrifice to sheep on the Elbon Mount and dedicate the skins to the goddess Diana. Now if you remember back to chapter 1, when the twins were born, they were nursed by a she-wolf, weren't they? Well, Livy's got something else in mind for them. After giving birth to the twins, Rhea Silvia goes up to the Elbon Mount to sacrifice those same two sheep, and instead of leaving the skins for Diana, she uses them to make a little tunic and cloak for the twins, putting the boy in the cloak and the girl in the tunic, which is important for reasons we'll see later. Then she leaves them on the mountain to die. Now, when the twins are found, it is not by a she-wolf, but by a female deer. She licks the boy to warm him and carries him away in her mouth to be suckled by a nanny goat. So that's a bit of a difference, and again, it matters later. Now, here's where the two accounts diverge. In the Carmen, the deer runs into the woods and the twins grow up wild and free, eventually returning to kill their nasty uncle and restore their grandfather to power. In Livy, the deer brings the babies down to the river Tiber and they rediscovered by a herdsman and his wife, and they grow up in a little village. It doesn't really matter where they grow up, though, because eventually they come back to Alba Longa and do the exact same thing, kill their nasty uncle and restore their grandfather to power. Okay, great. And that's the end of their story. Right. No, it's not. But I'm afraid we'll have to leave that story for another day. In fact, we're going to leave these twins behind entirely for the time being and go back to Rhea Silvia. You see, she had a visitor during her time alone on the Alban Mount, and it was no ordinary man. It was Mars, the Roman personification of war, the Ares of the Greeks, and he is hot. So naturally, she sleeps with him and gets pregnant with twins. And this is where the Greek influence finally shows up. See, Livy tells us that Mars is a frequent lover of mortals, and that's why Romulus and Remus are half-divine. They have special powers and destinies that come from their godly parent, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the beginning of the story and start over. Again, we find Rhea Silvia alone on the Alban Mount with two babies, a boy and a girl, both conceived by Mars. She goes down the mountain, visits her father, the deposed King Numeta, and tells him, "Hey Dad, look, I have twins, and they're yours." Then she goes home and leaves the kids with their grandpa, while she goes out to sacrifice a bull to Mars. The twins play around, and it's the boy who pulls the girl around in a little wagon like a chariot. Now, When their grandfather goes to sacrifice the bull to Mars, it's the boy who grabs the knife out of his hands and performs the sacrifice himself. And when the bull is dead, the girl takes its skin and makes herself a little tunic and cloak. So the kids have switched roles from their earlier adventure on the mountain. And Livy thinks this is pretty neat because it foreshadows the role that Romulus and Remus will have in founding Rome. Later, Romulus will wear a tunic and Remus will wear a cloak. Okay, now that we're caught up, let's go back to Rhea Silvia. She comes home from her sacrifice to find a letter telling her that her kids have been taken to the king and declared enemies of the state, because kingship was a matter of male primogeniture. Since Romulus and Remus were girls, they were declared illegitimate heirs and sentenced to death. Romulus gloats to her that now there can be no question that he is secure in his kingship, and Rhea Silvia is inconsolable. Romulus, meanwhile, decides to show off a bit and go hunting, bringing his son and a few friends along to show how big and strong and brave they are. And they're terrible at it, because they're all so busy showing off for each other that they lose track of the stag. They're rechasing and wind up lost in the woods instead. Romulus gets angry and punishes his son for getting them lost, and the boy flees into the bushes and hides. And I think you can guess what happens next. Big Bad Uncle has been murdered by his own nephew, and now Romulus's reign of terror is over. And that is the world before the twins. And I can't believe we're already at the end of chapter 2. How is that possible? I feel like we haven't even gotten started. But fear not, my friends. We shall return to the twins in chapter 3, wherein they live up to their destiny and become the founders of Rome. See you then. This is chapter 3 of our series, The Infancy of Romulus and Remus. In this chapter, we will see the twins abandon their miraculous rescue, and then their early childhood up until they are old enough to be taken in by a human family. Now remember, this story comes from Roman legend, specifically the story of Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome. So if you're ready to begin, let's do it. So we left off last time with Rhea Silvia, the Vestal Virgin, having just given birth to twin boys, Romulus and Remus, at the command of her uncle, the evil king Romulus. She was stripped of her sacred status and sentenced to death by stoning. But fortunately for her, her brother, the good King Numitor, had just reclaimed his throne from Romulus, and so he pardoned her and allowed her to live. But because of the circumstances surrounding their birth, both Numitor and Rhea Silvia knew that it would be best if the twins were kept secret for now. And so while everyone else celebrated the return of King Nativity, Rhea took the twins down to the riverbank and prepared to abandon them, and then she placed the basket in the long reeds along the bank of the Tiber. Then when all was ready, she left them there and hoped for the best. And soon after, the basket was swept away by the current and began floating down the river. It is said that as Rhea watched the basket float farther and farther away, she lamented, "Oh, cruel fate! What sort of life awaits these children? Cast out on the banks of the Tiber, left to die of hunger and thirst, exposed to the heat of the sun or the cold of the moon. Alas, how many birds of prey circle overhead looking for just such an opportunity, and who could blame them?" But then she stopped herself, realizing that she was wasting her time with despair, and instead, she threw her arms up to heaven and prayed, "If any deity wishes to take pity on these infants, I relinquish my claim to them and allow that deity to deal with their future as they see fit." With that, Rhea turned around and walked back to safety, leaving the twins to their fate. Now, when the basket first entered the Tiber, it was quickly surrounded by snakes, fish, and all manner of amphibians who wanted to attack the infants. But just as they were about to tear into the babies, a she-wolf, Lupa in Latin, appeared from out of nowhere and scared them all away. Then, seeing that the coast was clear, she climbed into the basket and began to nurse the babies. And as they drank from her, she licked their faces and bodies clean, then cradled them in her den. And so that's how the twins survived their first night. But over the next few days, Lupita knew that she couldn't raise them by herself. They needed more than what she could provide. And so she brought them back to the riverbank each day to forage for food, calling out to all the animals to bring everything they could spare. The birds brought her pigeons and doves, the deer brought her fawns, the cows brought her calves, and the bees brought her honey, and Lupita shared all these gifts with the twins. Now, you may be asking yourself right now, what kind of wolf is this? Is she some divine creature sent to care for the babies? Well, yes and no. See, in Roman mythology, there were 3 main types of wolves. First, there were the wolves that belonged to Diana, the goddess of the moon and the hunt. These wolves were wild and untamable, perfectly adapted for life in the forest. Second, there were the household wolves, the ones that were tamed and kept as pets. They were loyal and protective of their families. And third, there were the wolves of the underworld, vicious and ferocious creatures that attacked travelers at night. Now Lupita was none of those. Lupita was a she-wolf, which in Roman mythology meant she was neither a pet nor a wild animal, but rather a creature that lived in between. She had a connection to the spiritual world and was able to communicate with ghosts, demons, and other creatures of the night. And so when Lupita found the twins in the basket, she knew it was her duty to save them, not because she was a motherly figure or because she felt any particular maternal instincts, but because saving the twins was her duty, her destiny. Now, while Lupita cared for the twins as best she could, she knew that they couldn't stay in the wild forever. One day, a young shepherd named Faustulus and his wife, Acca came to the river to gather herbs, and they found the twins there playing with a small dog. And though they thought the twins were cute, they knew they couldn't keep them in the forest. Instead, Faustulus took the twins back home and introduced them to his flock, and there the twins stayed for several years. They grew up strong and tall, fond of climbing trees and swimming in the nearby streams, and always in the company of Actaeon and her little dog. Even though they were raised separately, both Romulus and Remus grew into natural leaders, commanding the respect of their peers and even their elders. At the same time, though, the twins couldn't help but notice that they were different from the rest of the kids. For one thing, they were bigger and stronger. Also, they didn't have parents like the others, and they never saw their own kind except for the occasional visitor, and that made them feel alone and different. So they often fought and argued with one another. Both secretly wished that they had been born a single child, so that someone might have loved them more. However, deep down, despite all the squabbling, there was still a bond between the twins, a loyalty that only came from being twins, and that helped them through some pretty tough times. One day, for example, while gathering sticks for a fire, the boys wandered too far from home and got lost in the woods. The sun began to set and they were too afraid to go home, so they huddled together for warmth and comfort under a nearby tree. But soon the sky darkened and rain began to fall, and within minutes the forest was struck by lightning and thunder. Terrified, the twins ran for cover and took shelter in an opening under a rock. As they waited for the storm to pass, Remus looked over at Romulus and asked him a question that had been on his mind for some time. He said, "Do you ever wonder why we're here? Why did that old witch cast us out of the city? Or why did that horrible king allow us to be abandoned? Or why has no one ever come to find us? Are we really Amelis's bastards, or does he want us to die out here?" And then Romulus answered his brother, "Stop it, Remus. Don't say such things. I don't want to hear it. It makes me sad." And then Remus said, "I'm sorry, Romulus. I didn't mean to upset you. You know I never do it on purpose." And then Romulus replied, "It's all right, Remus. I guess I'm just tired. I wish we were back at the river with Lupa. At least we had food there and we weren't cold or wet." And then Remus said, "Me too, Romulus. Me too." And the two stayed silent until the storm had passed and the sun began to shine again. At that point Romulus stood up and said to Remus, "Come on, little brother, let's go home." And then the boys walked out from under the rock and headed back to the shepherd's hut. And as they walked, they knew that they might be different, that they might be unwanted, and that they might even be doomed to die someday. But in that moment, walking together through the sunshine towards home, they felt alive and grateful for the chance to live another day. Okay, that's our third chapter, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. Until then, remember, Rome wasn't built in a day, but we can watch it happen in 60 seconds. See you next time. Continuing with Chapter 4, The Young Warriors, of my original series, The Legend of Romulus and Remus, where we pick up with our two heroes, now grown up and living in the city of Alba Longa. As we open this chapter, we find Romulus and Remus now grown to be fine young men. They have left behind their life of carefree youth and have become leaders of bands of shepherds watching over their flocks on the hillsides around the city. They've heard tales of faraway lands and yearn to see them for themselves. One evening, as the sun dips below the horizon and paints the sky in hues of orange and purple, Romulus sits on a nearby hill overlooking his sheep. His eyes are distant, as if seeing something beyond the horizon. A deep longing seems to consume him. Remus joins his brother, laying down beside him on the soft grass. He, too, looks towards the setting sun, a contemplative silence falling between them. After a while, Remus breaks the quiet. "Do you ever think," he begins, his voice barely above a whisper, "of the world beyond our hills? Of the adventures that lie hidden in the unknown?" Romulus turns to his brother, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and sadness. "Every day," he replies, his voice echoing Remus's longing. "I dream of exploring the world, of discovering what lies beyond the boundaries of our home. He gestures towards the rolling hills that stretch as far as their eyes can see, hills that have been the backdrop of their lives, but also the cage that confines their dreams. Their gaze then turns towards the distant city of Alba Longa, where their uncle, King Romulus, rules with an iron fist. The thought of their uncle's oppressive rule, of the constraints it places on their freedom, stirs a feeling of resentment within them. They yearn to break free from the shackles of their responsibilities and set out on their own, to forge their own destinies away from the confines of their uncle's kingdom. But duty, they know, calls to them from the flock at their feet. For now, their responsibilities keep them tethered to the present, forcing them to confront the harsh realities of their existence. The dream of adventure, of freedom, is a luxury they can't afford. Yet the very next day, fate intervenes. As Romulus and Remus tend to their flocks, news reaches them that stirs them from their everyday drudgery. The neighboring ruler, a powerful lord by the name of Numata, has been overthrown by his ambitious brother, King Romulus. This unexpected turn of events shakes them to their core, awakening a sense of urgency within them. It's a call to action, a chance to break free from their mundane lives and potentially claim something greater for themselves. But it's a dangerous proposition, fraught with peril and uncertainty. Despite the risks, Romulus and Remus, driven by a potent mix of youthful idealism and burgeoning bravery, decide to ride to the aid of the dethroned ruler. They leave the safety of their hillside haven and descend into the valley below, their steps echoing the determination in their hearts. As they journey to the usurper's court, their thoughts race. They strategize, planning how they might best assist the fallen king. Yet as they approach the palace, they're met not just by the sight of imposing grandeur, but also by a chilling tableau of armed guards, their faces impassive, their loyalty to the usurper evident. It's a stark reminder of the danger that lies ahead. Now, while preparing for their audience with the usurper, a cunning plan forms in Romulus's mind. He instructs Remus to feign a sudden illness, to act weak and vulnerable before the king's men. And when they enter the throne room, the sight of Remus, supposedly stricken with a mysterious ailment, is enough to throw the guards off balance. It creates a momentary lapse in their focus, a distraction that Romulus uses to his advantage. In a swift, decisive move, Romulus draws his sword and lunges, taking down the unsuspecting guard. With one less enemy to contend with, he rushes to Remus's side, helping him to his feet. Together they fight back to back, their movements synchronized, their courage bolstered by the promise of justice. They navigate through the corridors of the palace, their senses heightened, their determination unwavering. They're not just fighting for Numata now, they're fighting for their own freedom, for the chance to carve their names in the annals of history. Finally, they burst out of the palace gates, leaving behind the echoes of battle and the weight of their lineage, which neither of them knew they possessed, until they reached the forest's edge. There they encounter two shepherds tending to their flocks. These men, travelers who've come from distant lands, regale them with tales of faraway places, fanning the flames of their wanderlust. And upon hearing of their valor, these strangers hail them as heroes. Their spirits lifted by the praise and emboldened by their recent victory, Romulus and Remus announce their intention to set out on an adventure, to explore the world beyond their familiar hills. They want to see the wonders that lie hidden in the unknown. But the moment of excitement is cut short by a chilling realization. They've unwittingly revealed their location and their intentions to potential enemies. King Romulus, no doubt aware of their presence in the city, will be looking for them. Romulus's spies, eager to eliminate any threat to their master's rule, may be watching from the shadows. The weight of their decision presses down on them. Their thirst for adventure is countered by the looming threat of danger. And as they prepare for the journey, they take precautions. They hide their weapons, disguise themselves as commoners, and slip out of the city under the cover of night. They move like phantoms through the darkness, their steps soundless, their faces hidden beneath hooded cloaks. They make their way to a secluded clearing on the outskirts of the city. Here, hidden from prying eyes, they change into rough-spun traveling clothes, donning garments that speak not of noble birth, but of humble wanderers. With their disguises complete, Romulus and Remus melt into the darkness, becoming two more lost souls seeking passage out of the city's unforgiving walls. Dawn breaks as they leave the city behind, the first light of day painting the eastern sky in soft hues of rose and gold. As they walk, the full weight of their decision crashes upon them. Their lives, once filled with the simple joys of shepherding, are now on a trajectory they can only guess at. The path ahead is fraught with peril, with danger lurking around every bend. Now, somewhere in the sprawling countryside, King Romulus's spies are stirring. No doubt tipped off by the treacherous travelers they had encountered in the palace, they are closing in on Romulus and Remus, their faces grim, their intentions clear. Romulus wants his nephews dead. The brothers quicken their pace, their senses on high alert. They move with the stealth of seasoned hunters, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon, their ears attuned to the slightest rustle in the undergrowth. Yet despite the immediacy of their danger, Romulus steals a glance back at the city they've left behind. The towering walls of Alba Longa, once their prison, now stand as a fading silhouette against the morning sky. But their moment of respite is brief. In the distance they see a group of horsemen thundering towards them, their mounts kicking up dust devils in their wake. The horsemen are fast, their numbers intimidating. Even from afar, Romulus and Remus can see the cruel glint of malicious intent in the eyes of the riders. It's a look that speaks of power, of ruthlessness, of a willingness to snuff out their lives without a moment's hesitation. But as the horsemen close in, Romulus and Remus do not cower. Instead, they stand their ground. Romulus draws his sword, its polished surface catching the sunlight. Remus stands beside him, his face grim, his own weapon ready for the fight ahead. The leader of the horsemen, a man whose features are etched with cruelty, raises a hand, signaling for a halt. In a voice that drips with menace, he demands that Romulus and Remus surrender. But the brothers stand firm. They know that surrender would mean capture, perhaps even worse. For them there is no middle ground. It's a fight to the death. And so the battle commences. A clash of steel on steel, of muscle against muscle. Swords flash, shields are raised, and the ground is quickly stained with the crimson of battle. The fight is fierce, each blow carrying the weight of desperation. But despite their valiant efforts, Romulus and Remus are slowly being overwhelmed. The odds are too great, the enemy too strong. Just as it seems all hope is lost and defeat is imminent, a war cry rings out. The brothers turn to see a group of armed men charging into the fray. Leading this new force is a man of commanding presence, his face weathered, his eyes filled with purpose. At his side rides another, younger, his face handsome, his bearing confident. Together, they fight as one, turning the tide of battle in favor of Romulus and Remus. The newcomers fight with skill and ferocity, easily dispatching several of the attackers. The tide of the battle turns, giving Romulus and Remus a much-needed reprieve. With newfound strength, they rally, their hope rekindled by the arrival of their mysterious rescuers. But as the battle reaches its climax, the young prince is captured and taken away by the very man who leads the attack against his uncle. To save his brother, Romulus has no choice but to flee. Left with a heavy heart and a sense of betrayal, Romulus journeys alone into the unknown, the weight of his quest pressing heavily upon him. His mission is clear: rescue his brother at any cost. As he journeys, he meets a wise old woman who becomes his guide. She leads him to a cave where he meets a group of mystical giants who offer him shelter. Within this cave is a magical spring whose water grants powers when consumed. After bathing in the water, he is granted immense strength and a protective amulet that will shield him from harm. Now, fortified by the gifts of the giants, Romulus sets out once more, this time to confront his brother's captor, King Romulus himself. Upon reaching Alba Longa, Romulus infiltrates the king's palace, navigating through the labyrinthine corridors, until he reaches his brother's cell. There he finds Remus weak and injured, yet defiant. With the help of some loyal servants, Romulus helps his brother escape. Together they flee the city, pursued by Romulus and his men. But Romulus and Remus, bolstered by their newfound strength and determination, manage to evade their pursuers. Eventually they reach the top of a nearby hill. From this vantage point, they look back at Alba Longa, the place that has been both their home and their prison. But as they watch, the earth trembles beneath their feet. Before them, the ground splits open, revealing a magnificent palace carved from white marble. And from the palace steps, a regal woman descends. Her face is beautiful, her bearing regal. Upon seeing Romulus and Remus, she rushes to embrace them, tears of joy streaming down her face. She reveals herself to be their mother, Princess Rhea Silvia, who had been transformed into a she-wolf by Romulus, so he could keep her son's bloodline for himself. With the truth unveiled, Romulus and Remus discover that they are the rightful heirs to the throne of Alba Longa. The palace that had been hidden from them now stands as a beacon, welcoming them home as its rightful owners. And so ends this chapter, leaving us on the precipice of a new beginning. The brothers are now not just adventurers, nor merely shepherds. They are princes, poised to take their rightful place on the throne of Alba Longa, but the road to claiming their heritage is fraught with challenges. King Romulus still lurks, waiting to regain control. The question is, will Romulus and Remus be able to unite their people and claim the throne as the legend foretold, or will Romulus once again thwart their destiny? That, dear viewers, is for the next chapter to reveal. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to show your support. Until next time, remember, the legend lives on. Chapter 5: The Quest to Found a New City. In our last episode, we saw how Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a she-wolf, came upon the settlement of Alba Longa. There they met King Romulus, who out of respect for their uncle, King Numita, allowed them to stay in the city. The twins quickly rose to prominence because of their strength and valor, eventually becoming the right-hand men of the king. However, when it became clear that Romulus had no intention of giving them any more power, the brothers resolved to leave and found their own city somewhere else. So now, the question is, where did they go, and how did they decide where to settle? Well, let's find out in today's episode. Chapter 5 of the History of Rome. The twins decided they did not want to rule over Alba Longa, because that would mean serving under the authority of their uncle, King Numita. Instead, they wanted to be masters of their own destiny. Therefore, they began searching for another place to settle. Now, they wanted to build a new city where they were saved as infants after escaping the assassins sent by their grandfather, King Romulus. This is why Romulus will later claim that he founded Rome on the spot where the she-wolf suckled him. It was a place where they could escape the influence of their family and start anew. But just exactly where was this place? Well, they journeyed south across the Tiber River and then went up the stream, until they came to a marshy, swampy plain. Romulus liked the location. He thought the area could become great one day. However, there was some debate. Remus felt that it was too far from the other settlements. It was an inhospitable wasteland, and besides, there was already a settlement nearby at the top of the Palatine Hill. Why not just submit themselves to the king of that city and become part of his dominion? That way they wouldn't have to work so hard to build a new city from nothing. Now, here's the thing. You see, Romulus and Remus were destined to be kings. They weren't looking to serve as subjects to anyone, and Romulus was adamant that they should build their new city on the banks of the Tiber, even though it was a complete swamp. So the brothers argued about what to do, but they couldn't come to a decision. Being twins, they were equal in status. Romulus couldn't force his will upon Remus, and vice versa. Therefore, they needed to find some way to determine who would be king and where the city would be built. Finally, they settled on a method called augury. In this method, one's fortune was determined by taking omens from the gods, and the way omens were interpreted was by observing the flight patterns of birds. Now, there were different ways to practice augury. Sometimes it was done by watching birds fly over from a particular direction. Other times it was done by releasing a caged bird and watching how it flew away. And sometimes it was done by simply watching a bird sitting on a roof, looking for signs of good or bad luck. But in this case, it was decided that whoever saw the most birds during the course of a single day would win the argument. So where would they do this? Well, Livy tells us that they went up to the Palatine Hill, which was the seat of the nearby city, and watched the birds from there. Fast forward to the next morning. Romulus got up early, went to the top of the hill, and waited to watch the birds. Around midday, a flock of vultures appeared flying overhead. Romulus counted them and saw 12. Excited, he ran down the hill to tell Remus what he had seen. However, Remus said, "Wait, you counted wrong. The flock wasn't entirely made up of vultures. Some were kites, and you included those in your count." Hearing this, Romulus became angry and said, "Then I guess you'll be king since you can count better than I." Remus replied, "No, I say there were 6 vultures, and that's the end of it." Romulus said, "Fine, if that's how you see it, then I guess I'll be king." And with that, the dispute was settled. However, things did untend there because the brothers went back to the top of the Palatine Hill every day for 10 days, trying to prove that their omen was correct. On the first day, Romulus saw 7 vultures and 3 kites. The second day, 8 and 2. The third day, 9 and 1. The fourth day, 7 and 3. The fifth day, 9 and 1. The sixth day, 7 and 3. The seventh day, 9 and 1. The eighth day, 7 and 3. The ninth day, 9 and 1. And the 10th day, Romulus saw 12 vultures, while Remus saw only 6. Now, obviously, this is a very odd story. Why would the numbers be the same every day? Why would the boys bother counting if the numbers never changed? And why would Romulus suddenly begin counting again after getting upset with Remus? It doesn't make sense. But Livy must have been really confident in his sources, because he goes on to say that the numbers he gives are actually recorded in an ancient book of theirs called the Fasti Consideres. But the problem is that we don't have that book, so it's impossible for us to verify Livy's claims. And unfortunately, there's more bad news. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who wrote another history of Rome, says that Romulus saw 10 vultures and Remus saw 7, but Plutarch says that Romulus saw 6 and Remus saw 3. These different accounts only add more confusion to the matter, making it more difficult for us to figure out what really happened. However, whether it was 3, 6, 7, 9, 10, or 12 vultures, one thing is certain: Romulus won. The next day, he took Remus up to the Palatine Hill and showed him the spot where he intended to build the city. However, Remus pointed to the nearby city of 7 hills and said, "See, brother, the land around here is ours by right of conquest. Let's not build a new city, let's go live in that one." But Romulus said, "No, we came here to be free, not to conquer. We aren't going to be kings over the Alban people." With that, the dispute continued. So the brothers decided to settle the matter by throwing lots, and Romulus won. Remus became angry and ran off into the woods near the settlement. A short time later he came out carrying 2 bundles of twigs, and he laid them down, saying, "This city will be built with sticks like these." Romulus picked them up, looked at them and said, "You may laugh now, brother, but one day this city will be great." Remus said, Yeah, keep dreaming, but I say this land is cursed. No city can ever prosper here." From there the brothers went their separate ways. Romulus gathered some shepherds and slaves from neighboring cities, inviting them to join him in building a new city on the banks of the Tiber. Remus went to the Alban king and told him about Romulus's plan to build a competing city. Amulius immediately ordered soldiers to march to the Palatine Hill and kill Romulus and all of his followers. So now in our next episode, we'll see how Romulus and Remus prepared for war. We'll watch the battle unfold and see who came out on top. Okay everyone, that's our episode for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe. It really helps support the channel. Finally, if you want to learn more about classical history, check out my articles on my blog. I post new ones every week. There's something there for everyone. Also, I'm planning on posting more content on the blog soon, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. This is chapter 6 of the history of Rome. The last time we saw our boys, they had just gotten their she-wolf mom, and then they grew up and killed her, and now they're fighting over who should be king of their new city, and they both think that their god told them that it should be them. So naturally, they're both super sure that they're right. Romulus is pissed because Remus has claimed that he was chosen by the god Mars, and that Mars has given him the right to rule. But Romulus says, "No, I'm the one who's been chosen by the gods." He actually says by all the gods, plural. So you know it's got to be true. There's safety in numbers. This is exactly how every argument with a friend goes. "No, my Pokemon card is better than yours." "No, my dad's gonna spank you harder than yours." "No, my god totally chose me." If this were a normal story, Remus would at least admit that maybe he could be wrong, you know, that Mars might have misinformed him or whatever. But this is not a normal story. This is a Livy story. So instead, when Romulus says, "Haha, your god is a liar," Remus responds, "No, your whole family tree is a bunch of liars." Like, well, that escalated quickly. Okay, now there's only one way to settle this dispute. So the 2 brothers go out into the street, and they start having a sword fight. Just your typical bro fight. They're swinging swords at each other and screaming and sweating and probably losing flies. And after a while, Remus gets so pissed off with Romulus dodging and weaving that he stops attacking and he starts taunting him. He tells Romulus that if he's so hotshot, then why doesn't he jump over the city walls? And Romulus does, you know, because that's what hotshots do. Obviously though, there's a bit of a problem here because the implication is that these walls are tall enough that if you jump over them, you'd be a goner. But the twins are young and hotshot and immortal, so they don't really think about things like, you know, physics and death and stuff. They just live in the moment. And afterwards, when Romulus lands safely on the other side of the wall, Remus loses his mind. He screams at Romulus, "That shows how much of a coward you are. I guess I was right. Your whole family is full of cowards." And then Romulus gets pissed again and he stabs Remus in the ass. Yep, that's right. We get a butt stab. And in the most epic fashion possible, As Remus is bleeding out on the ground, Romulus says, "This is for my walls. So perish anyone who leaps over my walls." And there you have it, the origin of Rome's greatest defense mechanism, stabbing people in the butt. Okay, but that's not quite how all versions go. In fact, the version with the butt stabbing is pretty obscure. Most tellings have Romulus getting pissed at Remus taunting him to jump the walls, but then instead of doing it himself, he just has his followers jump the walls and kill Remus. Either way, though, the end result is the same. We have fratricidal little boys killing each other in the streets. Yet this is not a great look for the founders of Rome. To be fair, none of the Romans seemed to mind. They loved the whole Romulus is the greatest thing ever narrative, even though, he killed his twin brother. I mean, despite being raised by wolves, apparently Romans still believed in sibling solidarity. Maybe they thought Remus deserved it for being a little shit. Like he did piss Romulus off twice. Once when he taunted him to jump the wall, and once when he said that Romulus's whole family was full of liars. That's kind of messed up, man. And I feel like the Romans just needed an excuse to get rid of Remus anyway. Because obviously Romulus is the best one, and we need someone to root for. But seriously, think about this for a second. These two are identical twins, with the same parents who grew up together and did everything together since the day they were born. And they've always been super close, inseparable even. And then one day they have a fight, and the next day one of them is dead. Talk about a rough patch. I mean, sure, siblings fight all the time, but usually those fights are about whose turn it is to clean the bathroom or something. For these guys, it's about who gets to rule their brand new city. I mean, sure, it's a big deal, but can't they work it out? Like share power or flip a coin or something. No, because the Romans needed a strong man to found their city. Someone who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Someone who could do the hard, scary things necessary to build a civilization. In other words, the Romans wanted a fascist. Okay, let's not get too symbolic or anything. But Romulus does kill Remus, and if this were any other story, this would be the tragic part. Like we DB sitting here feeling sorry for Remus and how he didn't get to grow old and have kids and a fun job and, die peacefully in his sleep. But this is the story of Rome, and no one cares about Remus. He's the forgotten half. The one who's completely overshadowed by his twin brother. In art history, they call it the dead Christ syndrome, where when there's a painting of Jesus with Mary, you never look at Mary, it's always Jesus. Well, that's basically Remus. It's always Romulus. I mean, he's not completely forgotten. We do know a few things about him, thanks to the Romans writing down their own history. We know that he was a pretty good dude, brave and selfless and respected by everyone. We also know that he was skilled in battle, diplomatic, generous, and he loved the people of Rome with all his heart. Oh wait, sorry, that was Marcus Aurelius. Never mind. The point is, Remus is basically just a footnote in the story of Rome, a footnote that makes Romulus look bad. I'll tell you what though, if you want to see Remus get his due, you should check out a certain author's book, The Song of Achilles. It's a beautiful story that reimagines the Trojan War from the perspective of Patroclus and Achilles. And yeah, it's sad and haunting and amazing. And even though it's not a Roman story, I bet Remus would appreciate it. Alright, we're back. Chapter 7, Legacy and Symbolism of Remus now. This is kind of a weird one. This chapter doesn't have much to go on. We don't have any explicit literary sources that mention what happens to Remus after his death, though there are a couple interesting ones that come close. But instead, we have to look at symbolism. So, we're going to be looking at representations of Remus across Roman thought from Livy to Plutarch to Ovid and beyond. And what I want to try and show you today is that even when Remus isn't explicitly mentioned, he's still present as a symbol. And by looking at how Rome remembered him, or maybe more accurately, remembered Romulus's brother, we can see what Romans thought about themselves and where they thought they were going. Let's do this. Alright, let's start with some history. Okay, so if you've been keeping up with the series, you'll know that the story of Romulus and Remus goes something like this. These twin brothers are raised by a she-wolf, found by a shepherd named Faustulus, then later taken in by King Numitor of Alba Longa. Now, they eventually take the throne of the Alban kings, but then Amulius, who's Numitor's brother and the usurper of the throne, makes Romulus and Remus kill each other. Of course, they don't listen and they decide to found the city of Rome instead. They make an agreement that whoever founds the city will be its sole ruler. Then they fight over it and Romulus kills Remus. He then becomes the first king of Rome and the story ends. Now, that's just one version of the story among many others. But the point here is that according to tradition, Romulus killed Remus in chapter 6. We looked at some alternative traditions where Remus survives and even rules alongside Romulus. But in this chapter, I want to focus on the standard version where Remus dies. And in that case, what is the point of remembering him? Well, in broad strokes, I think there are three things that Remus represents for the Romans. The first is brotherhood. The second is the cost of ambition. And the third is sacrifice. I know these are pretty abstract, but let me explain. So, the brotherhood thing is obvious. Remus and Romulus are twins. They're bound together by blood and by experience, and their story is fundamentally a tragedy of fratricidal conflict. It's the story of Cain and Abel, basically. And part of why it's so compelling is that we innately understand how strong those bonds must have been. The next one, the cost of ambition, requires a little more explanation. Basically, what I mean is that while Romulus and Remus both share in the blame for their conflict, I think it's clear that Romulus is the one who escalates things. Remus, for all his faults, does seem to be a fundamentally nicer guy. He seems to be less power-hungry and more content with their shared rule. Romulus, on the other hand, is driven by a lust for power and glory, and because of that, he loses everything, including his brother, who we remember as a better man. And finally, the sacrifice. This is where it gets really interesting. See, Remus dies so that Rome can be great. It's literally the only reason that Romulus kills him. And there's a sense in which this is tragic, but also necessary. I mean, obviously it would have been better for Rome if both of them had lived, but Romulus needed absolute power to achieve the greatness he envisioned for the city, and Remus was an obstacle to that, so he had to go. Now, obviously, none of this is unique to Remus. Every culture has stories of heroes who sacrificed their loved ones to achieve greatness. It's a staple of stories about founders. But what makes this interesting is how the Romans interpreted the story. For instance, Livy says that Romulus killed Remus out of necessity and that the deed weighs heavily on his mind. So much so that he almost immediately afterwards institutes a festival to honor his brother. And as Livy tells it, the Romans eventually come to think of the twins not as brothers, but as one person, a single spirit that manifests itself in two bodies. To quote Romulus himself, the one and the city were thought to be both founded and created by one mind and one design. That's Livy for you, always trying to make everything neat and tidy and suck all the blood out of the story. But what about Plutarch? Well, in his version, Romulus is actually put on trial for killing Remus, and he has to use rhetoric to defend his actions. And in this story, he focuses more on Remus's flaws. He points out that Remus was lazy, that he wanted to live a simple life, that he didn't want to be bothered with politics. Basically, he paints Remus as an obstacle to progress, which is why Romulus had to kill him. And to be fair, I think that's a valid interpretation. I mean, if Remus becomes king, he may never have wanted to conquer Latium or build Rome into a great empire. Then we have Ovid, who takes the exact opposite approach. He paints Romulus as the villain, a murderous tyrant who was only interested in power, and he paints Remus as the victim, a good and innocent man who was murdered for no reason other than his brother's lust for power. And again, to be fair, I think that's also a valid interpretation. I mean, we shouldn't forget that Remus was a real person. He wasn't just a plot device to further Romulus's character arc. He had his own personality, his own wants and needs and desires, and he deserved a happy ending. Instead, he got stabbed in the back by his own brother. Now, I know this sounds a bit confusing, but let me try to tie it together for you. My argument here is that each of these interpretations is valid and that Romans liked it that way. See, Romans liked complexity. They liked grappling with difficult questions. They liked acknowledging the ambiguity of life. In fact, that was kind of their thing, and I think that's reflected in how they remembered Remus. I mean, think about it. If they chose Romulus as their founder, that means they chose ambition over simplicity, conflict over peace, war over prosperity. In other words, they chose to be Romans, but that doesn't mean they forgot about Remus. Instead, he lives on as the shadowed twin, the dark side of Rome, the part of themselves that they knew they needed to sacrifice to become great. His story reminds them why they are the way they are, why their city was built on conflict and bloodshed, why their civilization is defined by order, strength, and martial prowess. Because in a sense, those things were born out of the violence that happened on the Palatine Hill so long ago. So yeah, that's what I think this chapter is about. We don't have a lot to go on, but what we do have, we can piece together a pretty good picture of Remus as a symbol, as an idea. And that's the thing about symbolism. It can be interpreted in multiple ways, and yet that doesn't diminish its power. In fact, it enhances it. The more complex it is, the more deeply human it becomes, and I think that's what Romans loved about their myths. They weren't just stories about the past. They were stories about themselves. They were stories that explained who they were and why they did the things they did. And in that sense, they were stories that needed to be constantly revisited, stories that needed to be kept alive. And that's why we remember Remus, because without understanding his sacrifice, we wouldn't understand Rome. Okay, that's all I have for now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And as always, if you want more, just hit subscribe, and I will see you next time. We come now to the last chapter in our book, chapter 8, and so it's time to say a gentle good night to all my little wolf pups. It's been a pleasure taking you on this exciting adventure through ancient Italy. We hope you've learned some cool facts along the way. We sure have. But don't worry if you didn't learn much or any of it, because we do it all again next week with a brand new set of adventures. Anyway, let's finish this one up, shall we? Let's do this. First off, quick warning before we begin. This episode does contain themes of death, violence, and attempted murder. So if those kinds of things upset you, then maybe skip to the 6-minute mark where I sum everything up for you, or stay till the end for the 7-minute mark where we take our final bow. Otherwise, let's get back to the story. Rewind with me for a moment. All the way back to chapter 1, where we heard about Romulus and his twin boys, Romulus and Remus, who he had raised ever since they were born in a basket on the bank of the Tiber River after their mother Rhea Silvia was violated by the war god Mars. Remember that one? How Romulus ordered them killed. He tossed them in the river to drown, but they survived. Then the boys were suckled by a she-wolf, which made them into a man. Practically, then Romulus sent them away to live in the woods where they fought each other until they discovered they were twins. Then they returned to the city, deposed their evil uncle, and established a kingdom in the very heart of Italy. Kind of a long story, right? Yeah, and in case you missed any of that, no worries. You can always go back and listen to previous episodes anytime. Just click the link below. We got them all listed there for you. Anyway, now that we're caught up, let's keep going. Now their first order of business as kings was to build a wall around the city. They called it the Servian Wall after their advisor Servius Tullius. Romulus wanted the wall to be tall and strong, but Remus thought it should be more of an oval shape so that the Romans could see over the top of the wall and spot enemies coming from far away. So to settle their differences, they agreed to sacrifice a virgin to the gods and let the result determine the wall's design. Well, when the time came for the sacrifice, Romulus drew first and cast his lots. It fell in his favor. So he built the wall just as he had planned. And he did it quickly too, in only 3 years. In fact, he might have finished sooner if he had taken time out to ravish a Sabine woman named Hercilia. Yes, despite being married, Romulus still liked to sow his wild oats, if you know what I mean. But that's neither here nor there, because soon afterwards, the wall was complete and Rome began to prosper. Now, Romulus continued to rule with wisdom and fairness. He established courts and councils and organized festivals and games. But as the city grew and the population increased, he decided he needed more land. So he marched his soldiers out of the gates to conquer neighboring towns. Meanwhile, Remus was busy making friends and influencing people. He led ambassadors to distant lands and concluded treaties with neighboring kings. Basically, while Romulus was out expanding the borders of the Roman kingdom, Remus was busy building alliances and making Rome more respectable among the other nations. In other words, they played to their strengths, which made them a pretty good team. But like all partnerships, there were times when their interests diverged. For example, when Romulus captured a group of enemies, including a handsome young prince named Theseus. You may have met him in our Mythology series, but if not, no worries. Just know that these two were once close friends who fought side by side against the giants at the end of the Bronze Age. Anyway, Romulus wanted to kill the prisoners, but Remus said no, instead offering them asylum and citizenship. That wasn't a big deal, except that when Remus went to tell his brother about it, Romulus got angry, saying something to the effect of, "Hey, you promised me I could kill these guys." And Remus responded, "Well, yeah, but I also promised you friendship and loyalty." So the point is, Romulus was never really satisfied with Remus's accomplishments, no matter what Remus did. Romulus believed he could have done it better or faster or with less bloodshed, and because of that, there was always tension between them. And then one day, the breaking point came. The two brothers got into a huge fight, like really, really big. Like they broke the sacred truce between them, like they called each other names, like really bad names, and eventually it came down to this. Romulus challenged Remus to a fistfight, and if that doesn't sound like your average Tuesday, then you must not have any brothers. Anyway, Romulus won the fight, obviously, otherwise Rome wouldn't have been named after him, but that's not the point. Here the point is that despite winning, Romulus felt awful because he had almost killed his brother. And in a moment of clarity, he realized that he had been a jerk and that Remus had been right about most things, especially that famous wall. So to fix things between them, Romulus invited Remus to watch his army drill from atop the very wall that they had built together. But when Remus arrived, he noticed that one of the soldiers was beating a captive with a stick, and seeing this, Remus couldn't help himself. He told his brother he had it wrong, that his soldiers were weak and undisciplined and probably smelled bad too. And Romulus, ever sensitive about criticism, got mad and threw a spear at Remus, accidentally killing him. Oh dear. Okay. So not exactly the outcome Romulus had hoped for, but sometimes when you throw a spear at someone, that happens. Not that we would know, but anyway, the point is that after his brother died, Romulus became very sad and had second thoughts about killing Remus. In fact, he began to think that the Sabine woman he had ravished, Rhea Silvia, had put a curse on him because she was a virgin. So to break the curse, he brought the bar off the gate he had built and created an altar to sacrifice. And from that day forward, Romulus was known as Romulus, the slayer of Remus. And although he founded the city of Rome and gave it its name, his brother Remus remained an important figure in Roman mythology. In fact, tradition held that every year on the anniversary of Remus's death, the Romans celebrated the festival of the Rogations, during which they fasted and prayed that Romulus might forgive them for killing Remus. So okay, that's the story of Romulus and Remus in a nutshell. Big thanks to all our supporters whose names you can see on screen right now. And if you want to see your name on the screen too, just join our membership program today. Hey, if you enjoyed this retelling of Romulus and Remus, then you'll love our podcast, Lore Olympus. It's a modern retelling of Greek mythology in a totally fresh style. You can listen to it anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you want to see what it looks like, just search for us on YouTube. New episodes premiere every Monday. Thanks for listening. Bye.